Hello and welcome to the two-man power trip of wrestling. I'm your host, JP John Poz. With me today, very special guest. You may know him as Cobra or a member of Thunder and Lightning Tag Team in WCW. He's, of course, the nWo or the bogus Sting. He's Mr. Jeff Farmer. Welcome, two-man power trip. How you doing?
Good, John. Thanks for having me.
What's going on in your world? What have you been up to?
Not too much. I work for the University of Miami. Here in Miami, it's where I live. And when I got out of wrestling, I actually went back to school, got a master's in public health, and kind of been focusing on that. So, wrestling doesn't get out of your blood, of course, but I kind of decided to do a little something else while I was still healthy.
What have you been doing as far as wrestling? Anything really wrestling-wise? You're
Uh,
just like
I
the
mean,
conventions.
Before the pandemic, I went to Tokyo for a promotion there. Obviously, I worked there for years, and it was with Muda and that group. And Don Fry came over. Actually, it was really good to see them. I actually saw Eric Bischoff and Sonny Ono in the airport. So yeah, nothing really recently. I mean, I still work out and stay in shape, but just not something I'm really focused on right now.
More like conventions, autographs, rather than
Yeah, stuff
wrestling.
like that. I really don't make too many appearances, just because I'm busy, so I really don't have a lot of time. But once in a while, I do. I'm good friends with Scott Norton, and if he says to come to something, sometimes I'll try to go to see him. But I really haven't been to too many of those events. Once in a while.
Now, when you go back and you look at the career, right? When most people do meet you, see you, do they associate you with NWO Sting or your time in Japan, or what's most?
Probably. I mean, that's a good question. I think the best wrestling I did and the probably the height of my career was in New Japan Pro Wrestling. That's where I really honed my craft and probably had some of the best matches ever in that company. I wrestled in All Japan. I was green, so I didn't know anything. Um, and then, of course, WCW was a big part of my wrestling career. A little bit of Thunder and Lightning, and then Cobra, and then the NWO Sting. And so the NWO Sting was probably, obviously the largest, kind of biggest thing to be involved in, which was, amazing for me. But yeah, a bulk of my career, just a lot of matches were in Japan.
Initially, when you're in Japan and you go over there, like how do you get booked over there? Is it through like Dory Funk Jr. or like how do you get booked over there?
Well, it's good that you mentioned that. Actually, I did get booked through Dory Funk Jr. the first time we went to Clark and I, who was Thunder of my tag team partner. We went over for Baba's group for a tag team tournament. I think it was 1993, if I'm not mistaken. And we had just signed with WCW, and I think Ole Anderson back then was the booker for WCW, and he said, go do your tour in Japan, and when you come back, we'll get you going here in WCW. But in New Japan, was really they had kind of a reciprocity with the WCW. So I first went over there as part of the NWO group, and I've said this before in some other interviews. They wanted all the NWO members because Japan was very hot in Japan. But Hogan and Nash and Hall aren't going to go. Of course, or Savage or any of the guys. So they said, you can take NWO Sting. You can take maybe Marcus Bagwell, um, Mike Rotundo, Brian Adams. Some of these guys that ended up going over there as NWO characters because they were really hot to get the NWO talent in New Japan. And I just ended up really staying there and working for like 3 years, probably.
And if you look at it, the NWO was so hot over there, though, like the merch was through the roof. I mean, just unbelievable.
Yeah, Scott and I talk about it to this day. It was insane. Like we sold out every arena. Like you said, the merch just wouldn't stay on the shelves. But it was an amazing run, an amazing kind of time to be in New Japan at that time. And it was just also all the top guys. If you think about Chono and Muda and Tenzan and Kojima and all those guys, and Ricky Choshu and Fujinami. I mean, everybody, all those top guys were there at that time, and they were all, super over. And so it was really an exciting time to be a part of any promotion, but that promotion in particular, it was really special. Scott and I talk about it, to this day.
What do you think resonated so much with those fans with those Japanese stars? Because man, 60,000 people, 50,000. I mean, it would just be huge crowds over
Yeah,
there. It was
yeah.
nuts.
The the Japanese are some of the best fans, anywhere. I've been fortunate enough to wrestle in India, in Europe, all over. But I think the Japanese fans, the culture of the Japanese people is one of a lot of respect. So right off the bat, they really respect the wrestlers, and they're very respectful as an audience. They know what they're very smart. They know the moves that you're going to do. They know the business. They know the holds, and they appreciate a really good, solid match. And I've never really experienced that anywhere else. I mean, at Corrigan Hall, they would be stomping their feet, on the stadium bleachers. And if you have never experienced something like that, it's wild. It's just wild.
I love that when they get into the match because sometimes they're more quiet and reserved and respectful, but I love when they get into it because they get crazy.
Yeah, yeah, and that's the beauty of it because they are very respectful, and they'll be really shy to even come up and ask you for an autograph or whatever. But they're just so appreciative. The fans were just so appreciative of wrestling, and so it was an honor for me to really be a part of that and to just I interacted, of course, with the fans, as we all did. But yeah, it was really special.
Did you have any sort of relationship with Antonio Inoki at that time
You
period?
know, I didn't. I mean, I met him and I knew who he was, and we met each other. They opened a dojo out in California. I don't know if you remember that. They had like a dojo, and I went out there for their opening of that. Inoki was there, but he did. I mean, I met him in the back a few times, but he didn't really. I don't think knew who I was necessarily, or really knew that much about me. So, but yeah, he was. Was nice to see him.
Man, absolute like God over there, pretty much. I mean, one of the
Yeah, he
biggest
was
draws,
he
right?
was he was the guy for sure.
People would line up and they'd pay to get slapped by him too, right?
That's right, to get chopped by Inoki, yeah,
What
yeah.
is that? Like a sign of
Again, where else does that happen? What other fans are gonna line up and let you chop them, Only in Japan, really. I can't think of anywhere else that something like that would happen. So, again, that kinda speaks for the fans. But, yeah, Inoki was, he was definitely, like a god over there, very, Choshu too, there's a lot of Fujinami, some of these guys that have been over there a long time and worked, Tenryu, they were very over. But Inoki was at kind of another level. He was kinda like, and this is just my take on it, maybe like the Muhammad Ali of pro wrestling. He was just a guy that took it to another level.
do the fans think that he's transferring like that fighting spirit over to them through the chop? He's giving them good luck?
That's a good question. I think it's just a badge of courage, or honor to have taken a slap from, it's like taking a punch from Mike Tyson, or it's like, I survived, or I got a punched in Mike Tyson. Of course, I know he's not slapping him as hard as he can, but I'm just saying it's probably like an honor thing where they took a slap or took a punch or whatever, something like that. That's only thing I can imagine.
So when you go over there and you're doing your tours, I mean, this is like weeks at a time, right? I mean, you're
Yeah.
doing long tours.
Yeah, Japan is brutal in that regard because you're of course you're fly 13 hours and your morning is their night and your night is their morning, so you're all out of whack, with your sleep, and it's brutal. You're wrestling every single night, and in the U.S., you wrestle, you do a loop, you do some towns, especially in the house shows, but you don't have that kind of. We sometimes on a 3-week tour would work 20 days. So you'd have one day off in 3 weeks, and some tours were 4 weeks, but it was a grind. But you kind of it's also funny. You get used to it because sometimes when I wrestle back in the States, I'd kind of like, well, let's go. I want to wrestle. Let's go do a match. And, you're like off for a few days, and there you're just, every day, every night you're going to be in the ring. And so you kind of, I don't want to say you program yourself for that, but you just get adapted to it. And it just becomes, I mean, after a week or two, that was the best shape I was in. And I trained to go over there. I mean, I was training to be ready for the matches because we'd wrestle 20, 30 minutes. And but nothing prepares you for a match like that except having a match like that. So you really can't, you can do cardio all day long, run stadiums, whatever, but until you're in the ring, it's just kind of like, it's hard to explain, but only doing it do you really get proficient enough in your cardio to kind of be able to do it. And after a week or two, we were rocking and rolling.
Do you like that lifestyle? Or did you like that lifestyle out there and how it was, or was it like a little bit of a culture shock?
Well, it's a good question too. The first time that I went over there with All Japan, it was really like a, I don't want to say a terrible experience, but it wasn't good. That was the tour that Terry Gordy, was on, that OD'd or whatever happened on that thing, and the whole, tag team tournament got out of whack a little bit. And we were young, we were green, and we were probably taking somebody's job, because you go in there and and it was a lot of tag teams that wanted to work there steady, and we didn't really understand it. We're just going over there for the experience, but there's groups over there that guys that have, that's where they work, that's their bread and butter. So you don't always get a warm reception, because you're competing with these other tag teams. So that part was a little bit tough when I first got over there. I felt kind of isolated. Of course, you don't speak the language. Really not getting a lot of help from the boys. You're not getting a lot of help. I mean, there was guys that were nice, like Del Wilkes and the Eagle. There was a what's his name? I know you know who I'm talking about. They were
Uh,
the Patriot and the Eagle. Oh, can't think of his
was it
name right
Jackie
now.
Fulton?
Yeah, Jackie. So that, they were nice, and the Can-Am guy. I mean, there was lots of nice teams there, but it's just, it's a strange experience. And then when I went the first time in New Japan, I'm expecting the same thing, to feel that same kind of thing. And actually, it was quite opposite. New Japan, they had Tayama, the referee, was there. He would take us around and answer any questions, and they took great care of us, and everything was really, can we get this, can we get that, or, so it was different. And I'm not knocking All Japan. It's a great company, and I would go back and work for them again, and I had friends that worked for them, but it was just like, I think it was my spin on it when I first went there versus the second time. It was just a little different. And then I, of course, started embracing the culture and the style of wrestling. It's a lot different than in the US. So you kind of learn. If it wasn't for Scott Norton, really, who took me under his wing, because he was already had been over there for years and was the IWGP heavyweight champion. And Scott really was the one who said, hey, you got to do this. This is what they expect from you. This is what they want. You're kind of like the big guy too, and they want you to be physical, and you have to lay it in. And so it was a trial and error, but with the right guidance. And Masa Saito too. Masa Saito was really our kind of boss over there. He was the booker, and Masa, was like a certainly a mentor for me, and almost like a dad for me over there. So, and Black Cat, who was there was a lot of people that were helping to kind of make sure that you did what they wanted, and that made a huge difference, because sometimes you don't know what to expect. I remember in WCW when we were there, like, you're going to wrestle, but you weren't really, nobody was really helping you that much to say, hey, do this, don't do that, do this, do that. I mean, you could get some veteran guys to help you, but again, in a way, you're also, you're taking their jobs, maybe, or taking their spot. So the wrestling business in itself is kind of, it's a lot of nepotism, and it's also very competitive.
When you
I
go
know I
back,
answered that way longer than,
no, perfect, great. When you go back and you look
uh,
at what happened with Terry Gordy in that fight, what did happen? Because they just, they did a doc about it not that long ago on Terry, but what happened?
I'd like to see the doc. I mean, I was there, Clark was there. I don't know the particulars really. I know that I'll tell you a little story that just one of the things that was part of my experience. So, Steve and Doc are up in the, first class or business class, whatever it was. And Clark and I, it's our first tour. We're green. We're just coming over. Dory booked us, and we're in coach, So, but we're sitting kind of towards the front of coach, and the plane wasn't necessarily full, and we could see, up to where those guys were. And I don't know who else was on there. There's a couple other kind of big stars that were up there too. Maybe Ted DiBiase. Um, I don't know who was all Butcher, maybe Abdullah Butcher was. I don't know, but I remember, we're sitting on the plane and we haven't left the airport yet. I think we're in L.A. And all of a sudden, there's all this commotion and yelling and screaming going on in the aisle, and I'm like, Clark, well, like what's happening? We're kind of like scared, and I hear Terry and Doc, they're cutting like a pro wrestling promo on some passengers in the plane because they were in their seats, right? And I mean, and they're like rough. They're doing their wrestling stuff, right? And I'm thinking to myself and Clark, we're like, oh my God, this is them. Like this is who they are. Like when you see them in the ring and they're like acting like that, this might really be their personality. Like this is them. We're sitting there trying to be not, mind our business and whatever, and man, I think what had happened was they'd overbooked it or something, and someone was in their seats. Of course, they straightened it out and they got seated. But I remember, it was like a big chaos right in the very beginning. And then, I don't know, I guess, they were taking some sleeping pills in order to go to sleep or whatever it was. I mean, I really can't speak on it because I have no idea. But, when we got to Narita airport, they had to wheel Terry off, in like a wheelchair. And then and I think they took him right to the hospital. And then, we got on the bus and they're all saying, okay, well, he's in the hospital, and they said, we're still going to do the tour, everything's going to go like it is, and we'll figure it out or whatever. And we did the whole thing. And he never rejoined the group. I think he was in the hospital in a coma. And then I think they resuscitated him a few times. And I think they flew his wife over maybe. And I mean, you hear stuff. I'm not sure I got the details right. I mean, I was there for what happened, but, we're on the bus and, it's not like something everybody's, talking about, right? Because you got to work and, you're busy with the tour, and I didn't know him, I didn't know him. I, met him in the airport and Joel Deaton. And I remember Joel Deaton. Joel Deaton was one of the guys that was there. I met him in the airport, but, I mean, I didn't hardly know anybody, but it was sad. I think it was tough. It was a tough, thing that happened and a bad break.
Scary and sad. He was kind of never the same again, really, after just crazy.
Yeah. I think he, maybe he was, if you're without oxygen for a certain amount of time, right, then you might have not be quite as sharp, when you come back. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know what happened to that extent, how when he was resuscitated or how many times or what happened. I wasn't there and I don't know, but yeah, it's a very, very unfortunate because I mean, I was a huge fan, of those guys. Just watching some of the tapes, Clark and I watched, him and Doc, and we're just, amazed. And even at that, we would watch every match almost, especially because we're in the back and we're green and we're trying to learn. We're just kind of watching everybody's match, and it was a great tour. I think. I mean, it was a tremendous tag team tournament, and it's a huge learning experience, for Clark and I.
When you and Clark are there, how long are you guys teaming before they bring you to Japan? Like, were you together a while?
Well, we were the tag team. Yeah, we were the tag team champions in the IWF, which was International Wrestling Federation, which Eddie Mansfield had started that league kind of in Orlando. And yeah, we broke in Steve Kern's school down in Tampa, Florida. Steve had a school down there. That's where the Nasty Boys went. And there was a lot of Ron Slinker was there, Jimmy Backlund was there as coaches. Steve Kern was one of the coaches, and so we would go down there like once a week from Orlando because that's where we were living, and we would go to the camp, and that's where we broke in, and then from there we went to the IWF, which was Eddie Mansfield's promotion, and remember the Smoking Guns, those guys,
Yep.
Brett and
Billy and
Kip.
Bart. Yep.
They were there as the Long Riders, and so they were in that same promotion, and they had the belts. We won the belts from them. So we had been wrestling a while as a tag team, but relatively inexperienced. Just the matches that we had around there and the training. I mean, we were getting better. We thought we were better than we were, at the time, but we could execute. I mean, I was a football player. Clark was athletic, and he's a big guy, but athletic. So we could, execute the moves really, well, and we had a lot of that down. But as far as ring psychology and some of the other stuff, that takes a long time to really get to understand that and be good at that. So we were learning, but if I had to say anything at that time when we went to All Japan, we were green. We were inexperienced tag team. Physically, we were, could do everything, but we just, needed more time training.
Now,
I think.
Now, how do you get into WCW?
Well, both Clark and I were in WCW, right? So we got. I think Jody Hamilton, who was down at the Power Plant. Jody or somebody from WCW scouted us at a match. I think Dory invited him or something. We did a house show or a match somewhere, and they came down and they came up to us after the match and said, "Hey, we really like you guys. We want you to, come to WCW." And we were like, of course, this is the best thing ever, right? That's the whole point of why we were doing it. So they said, come on up. So we ended up going up to WCW, and we signed a developmental contract, and that meant we had to go to the power plant. And we were, this again is one of those things where you just don't really know, the business that well. We were tag team champions, and we were thinking, we already went through school, right? We went through the training part. We need to get out and do matches. We want to do shows. We want to start getting out there. And in hindsight, the power plant was one of the best things that ever happened to us and to me, because we really realized that we didn't know that much. And then we got to learn under some tremendous talent down there, Sarge and Pez Watley, and Mike Winters was down there, Jody Hamilton, and then Blackjack Mulligan came in, Ole Anderson. You had a lot of the got Terry Taylor. Guys would come in from off the road in WCW and come down there some. Mike Graham. So you had a lot of these really talented, veteran wrestlers that were saying, helping us, which was an amazing experience. Now, the power plant, as you probably heard and a lot of people say, was brutal. And we were there in the beginning when it was really, really, tough. It was not as bad after, but anybody who was there in the beginning, you can ask Sarge about this. The first time in the power plant down in Jonesboro, when it was down there, it was rough. I mean, rough. And there were guys come down into the tryout and big guys all jacked up, and they would run, no joke, run out of there, get in their cars and peel out, getting out of that building. That's how bad it was. And
Wow.
We were animals because we were in such good shape at that time. We were doing, bucket squats by the hundreds, and we were all like machines. So they would get a guy off the street that wanted to be a pro wrestler, and he'd come in there, and it was just like, what is the saying? Fatigue makes cowards of us all, right? And they get in the ring, and we just eat them up. And next thing you know, they're gasping for air, and it was. I mean, we weren't trying to be mean. We were just letting them know, hey, this is not for everybody, and also you're not going to come in here and take my spot, or Clark wasn't going to let take his spot, and whoever, Ice Train was in there back then, and Big John. You remember? I mean, when I got down there, there's like. I was good size, but there was several 300, plus pounder big guys down there. So it was not for the faint of heart to go down to that power plant. And so it was good. I mean, it was a good experience. And that's where, we got kind of really learning. And we were also at that time doing shows. So we were going on the road on at that time they had like an A and a B show. So they had an A town and a B town, and then we were wrestling in these towns doing house shows. And and then what happened actually was we did this for like a year or so, and then we're like, we want our contract. And so they gave us a contract, and then we had a hotshot attorney in Orlando who was a friend of ours, and he said, "Let me look at your contract." And he looked at it and he goes, "Oh my God, this is terrible. You know, they're taking your likeness and your name, and you don't get anything, and you can't do any, promotional stuff, and you can't do any merchandise." And we had come up with Thunder and Lightning. That was our gimmick. Like we had T-shirts, and in the IWF we had a fan base, and they had T-shirts and stuff. So they said, this is horrible. So, or he said, and so we went back, and the guy made a bunch of changes to the contract. And of course, again, John, this is where you think you're a little better than you are, or think you have more leverage than you have. We thought we were going to be the next Road Warriors or whatever, right? So we're like, we're going to be great. And they went back to Eric and Bischoff and the WCW, and I think they had a meeting. I don't know this for a fact, but I think they sat down at the table and said, "Hey, do we really need Thunder and Lightning? Is this they're asking for X, Y, and Z?" But we didn't know. We would have said, "Okay, we'll negotiate. Take that out." But it wasn't like we were trying to be difficult. We just thought it was a professional thing to do, right? We're thinking, they're going to think we're idiots if we don't have an attorney and we're not taking this serious. But we didn't know. Like if you get in the NFL, you have an agent, right? Somebody on your behalf that's going to say, "Hey, this is Jeff, so whatever runs at 40. We want to get the most money." But we just didn't know. So what happened subsequently from that interaction with the bookers is Eric sent us a message, or I don't know if it was Eric, but somebody called us and said, "Hey, we're withdrawing our offer for you guys." And so, and I have to tell you, this was devastating because Clark and I, moved from Orlando to Atlanta. So, and he brought his girl, I brought a girlfriend. He got married. So he's married at this time. I have a girlfriend there. We're living together. So we like uprooted and went to Atlanta. And now we don't have jobs, basically. Like they just said, "Hey," and they're just saying, we're not going to do it. So, it was really tough. Clark ended up going back to his family's trucking company, his wife's family's trucking company, and he started working for them and actually got out of the business. I went back to school. I was going to teach maybe. And actually I bumped into Dallas Page, and he's like, "Hey, you're really good. You can do it by yourself. You can do a single." And as another, what else happened? I went to Europe on a couple tours too. So I was booked as Thunder and Lightning, but Thunder wasn't there. So I just went as Lightning. And I think one time we had another guy play Thunder. And then the other time I just worked as a single or tagged up with somebody in a match. So I did a couple tours as an independent, just didn't really get out of it yet, but I wasn't sure what I was going to do. And after that experience, I was kind of like, okay, I'm thinking about not doing this, right? And so I was going to go back to school. And Dallas Page was like, "Hey, come down to the power plant. They're not going to charge you anything. They know you. Just come down there and figure something out." So I did. I went back to the power plant, and I came up with the Cobra character, and I started working as a single. But I had been a tag team wrestler pretty much the whole time, right? So I was a really tag wrestler. So it was a little different working as a single. It was awkward for me, or I had to learn more. So I started doing singles, and then I went down. At this point, Ric Flair had the book at WCW, and they were running at Center Stage. And I don't remember that arena down there at Center Stage in Alpha Peachtree. And he said, "I've seen you work. I know you know how to work." He said, "Come down and we'll do something." So I went down to Center Stage in my Cobra stuff and started kind of working matches as Cobra. But I didn't have a full contract with WCW, but I was, getting paid per match, stuff like that. So it was a way back in, but it was an interesting story at this time too. So I had also, this is a funny story, John, actually, that before that, when I was in Orlando with Clark, remember the American Gladiators when that came out, that show?
Oh yeah. Yes.
A long time ago. So they came to my town, and I hated that little Nitro guy. member on the
Oh
show.
yeah, a lot of
And
people did. Yeah,
I
yeah.
hated him, right? So I'm like, they came to our town for tryouts, and now I was, fast, and I ran like a 4.45 40-yard dash, in college, and I lifting a lot, so I was in good shape. So they design it really so that a big guy can't finish it, right? So they make first that you do a 40, and if you can't run fast enough, you're eliminated. Then you have to do all these push-ups. If you can't do enough, you're eliminated. And then you have to do other things like pull-ups, and you had other stuff. And so it's basically a way to weed out anybody who's big. You basically
Yep.
get down to like small guys, and that's what they wanted as contestants. And so I'm on the last thing that before I've done everything right, and they're starting to get nervous. The promoters are over there, and I'm probably, I don't know, 260 at this time, maybe 255. And they come over, and I had to do pull-ups. And I think you had to do like 17 or 20 something pull-ups. You could drop off the bar, but you had a certain time limit to get them all in. And they were counting them, like a kind of a CrossFit type thing. And I was close, but I didn't quite get enough pull-ups. And, again, I'm 260 trying to do pull-ups, right? So it's a lot of weight. And they came over. The guy came over and he said, "Listen, we were all sweating and nervous that you were gonna make it." And I said, "Why?" Because I wanted to get on the show and compete. And they go, "They don't want someone like you on the show. They don't want to get hurt." He said, "These guys don't want to get hurt." And he goes, "But," he said, "I want you to try out for a gladiator." And I said, "Oh, well, I didn't really think of that." And so that guy called me up and said, "Can you come down to Orlando and do a gladiator tryout?" That's a different tryout where you do it. And remember that one where they would run and put the balls in the little basket,
Yes.
and you had to block the guy. And I and
Yep.
I was a linebacker, so that for me, I mean, and the guy. So I did all this stuff, and then rope climbs, whatever. And the guy came back and he said, "We want you to be a gladiator." He said, "But you have to go to Europe." And he said, "It's X amount a week." And he goes, "We pay for everything, but we're starting up. This was when it was hot, back in the day." And they said, "But we're doing a Europe one. You have to go there first, and then maybe you'll get over here." So I said, "Okay, let me think about it." And right when this was happening almost is when, because I wasn't happy with Cobra because I really wasn't doing much with Cobra, right? I mean, I was just doing like every now and then or whatever. And that's when Eric Bischoff, I think he told Dallas, he says, "Hey, I want to do the nWo Sting." And I think Farmer, looks like Steve, and it could be a good thing. They have the similar builds. And he said, "But if it gets out, if it leaks at all, I'm squashing it." He goes, "We're not going to do it." And then Dallas said, "Hey, Eric wants you to do this, and they're going to give you a contract. And, we're going to want you to be, back in the WCW." And I remember I talked to my ex-wife and I said, I don't want to do the gladiators, but it was a job, And I said, "But then I'm overseas and we'll have to move over there." Or I said, "I can do wrestling." And she's like, "You know how to wrestle. You've already been doing it. Why don't you do the wrestling?" And I said, "I think that's the best move." So I went back and said, "Okay, I'll do the nWo Sting." And that's kind of how that started.
Wow, it was either American Gladiators or play NWO Sting. Crazy.
Yeah, it was crazy. I mean, the gladiators would have been fun, but I mean, I'd already been wrestling for years, so I was kind of like used to that. But yeah, it was just an interesting sidetrack that just kind of happened. Or I was going to teach. I'd already been taking master's level courses to go back into. I was going to teach.
They have those American Gladiator documentaries that came
I
out.
saw
There's
them.
an
I saw them.
HBO and a
And
Netflix
you
one.
know what's funny is, as much as I hated Nitro as a character, when I watch a documentary, I liked him. Then all of a sudden I'm
Yeah,
like, man, I
definitely.
really like this guy now. He's not so bad. But it's just how he came off, on the show. I just really, wanted to wring his neck,
Yeah,
and I know that was probably, I didn't know at the time that's he's getting heat, right?
yeah,
He's getting heat.
yep.
That's what he should do, and that's why the show was good. But it's just a funny twist.
They had their contract issues too. They were getting screwed over left
Yeah,
and
I
right.
saw that in the documentary. Yeah, it would have been, it'd have been a short lived, and who knows how Europe would have been. I don't know how that whole thing would have. I didn't know how long that went, and then you come back here, and it was a risk. I mean, wrestling's a risk too. You don't know. Nothing is guaranteed. These kind of occupations where you're doing something like that as an independent contractor, you just never know. that goes for, all these companies, All Japan, New Japan, any wrestling company, WCW, AEW, whatever, they're risky. You don't know, you get hurt, you could be out. Some of the companies don't compensate you at all. They'll pay for your injury to get repaired, but then they're like, see ya, thanks for playing. And so it's a pro wrestling is a risky business. It's very risky. There's no 401ks. There's nothing set up for you for retirement. It's basically you're self-employed, and you can make a lot of money, but it's not easy, and it's dangerous. It's definitely dangerous.
So when they give you and propose to you the NWO Sting, and Eric says this is what we want for you, what did you think of it? Did you think it had legs? Did you think it had life? Because man, what a gimmick! Because Sting's the hottest babyface they had.
He was the franchise, really,
Yeah.
and I've said this publicly before. I was a big fan of Sting. I mean, the funny part was I wasn't really a mark for any of the wrestling. I wasn't even really a wrestling fan, growing up. I mean, I watched, Dusty Rhodes and those guys, but I was a football player, and I mean, I wasn't really like, I wasn't a wrestling fan, until I started doing it. Then I kind of learned, but seeing, I mean, obviously when I started watching and you see those guys, I was impressed with like Tony Atlas, right? Because Tony Atlas I was into bodybuilding and training, and so when Tony Atlas came out, I didn't care if he did any move. If he just bent over and got a glass of water, I was like, look at that guy, man. That's just freaky. So part of that was just how amazing Tony Atlas looked, in the ring, and you just like watching somebody like that in awe. And, Lex and Sting and those guys, I was fans of theirs, because I just thought how they conducted themselves really professionally in the back, and they were training and taking care of themselves. And not that I didn't like the guys that were doing the other way, but I'm just saying it was somebody I was, admired. And then, yeah, we get in there in the NWC. I think initially it was just going to be like a short interval. I don't think it was something they were planning on a character coming out of, right? And probably Steve didn't want that either, I imagine. So when I attacked Lex, remember in the
Parking lot.
Yeah, in the parking lot, out of the limo, everybody thought it was Steve, and I think that big swerve could have been it, right? It could have been, that's it. They find out it's not him. He's vindicated or whatever, right? And then there's some bad guy, and we never hear from him again. But I think that Hogan kind of liked it, and maybe those guys liked it and said, hey, we can do more with this. Now, in my opinion, and this is later, because when I ended up going to Japan, I mean, Steve was mostly coming out of the rafters. He wasn't even working at that time. He wasn't even having matches, right? Meanwhile, I'm in Japan working every single day as NWO Sting. So my character, and I started changing it too. At first I did the woos and tried to do the Sting, right? But as it progressed, they knew they know I'm not Steve. They know I'm the NWO Sting. They know I'm not trying to fool them that I'm Steve at all. They know I'm the NWO Sting, and they're clear about that. So I started changing my wrestling a little bit, incorporating my style a little more. I mean, I still use the Scorpion and things like that, some signature stuff, but I just started wrestling really as me, but in the NWO Sting kind of outfit. And they knew the difference. And what my point of this, kind of thing is that there was so much potential after that character got over in New Japan that they could have done. Me and him, Steve and I could have wrestled each other in Tokyo, and we would have brought the house down. It would have been a sold out show. Then we could have tagged up together, right? We could have done something where we ended up forming an alliance, and now two Stings take on somebody. There were so many ways that could have gone, but I have no idea about, what the office was thinking and what the whole point was, and, all of that. I mean, I wasn't in those conversations to say, hey, I think this could be good. I couldn't say, I didn't say anything. I just did what they told me and worked hard in Japan. Japan was different because I had more control there, and they knew my character, and Masa and I had a good relationship, and it was I could do what I wanted really in New Japan. So I wasn't under any kind of restraints there. But in the U.S., I am some. So that's why it evolved so much in Japan, because I was able to make it evolve and kind of become its own thing. But I was just, I was under contract and doing what WCW had me contracted to do, which was, be the NWO Sting. But
Man,
had a lot of potential.
I love that angle. One of my favorites, just because of the way Shivani even sells it. 'Cause remember Fall Brawl when
Yep.
we don't know he tells them to stick it, that he told them they should have trusted him. It's the NWO versus Sting and
Yeah.
Luger and the Horsemen. And when you come out, Shivani sells it like it's really Sting. He goes, "All right, that's it. WCW's dead. We're through." Like he was legitimately, the way he sold it was like he hated you. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
this sucked. Like his selling
Tony,
of it made it for me.
yeah. Tony was a consummate professional, and Bobby Heenan and all those guys. Those guys made the show, right? Because if you watch wrestling without audio, it's boring, or it's just, some of it's like watching paint dry. But when you have guys like that, Tony Schiavone and Heenan and Eric Bischoff, Eric was another one who he was doing that before he got the business. Those guys make it, and Terry, whoever's doing the commentary, color commentary, they make it believable and exciting. And that's how you really get the people, because without them leading, kind of taking us through it, you kind of don't know what's going on. So hats off to those guys. And I do remember that was probably one of the biggest pops, ever for me, and then to come out and of course I'm thinking, John, I don't want to screw up. Now there's all this pressure on me. I'm the junior guy. You got Flair and Arn and Hogan and Hall and Nash and everybody, and I'm just kind of like, oh, I just don't want to mess up. I mean, I knew what I was going to do, and I felt pretty confident about my ability, but you just never know. And it was a lot of pressure, to perform, but it was fine. It worked out perfect, and to this day, it was one of the most fun times I had in the ring.
So cool, just the way it went down. Then obviously the real Sting comes out. Oh
Yeah,
my God, Shivani flips it. This is great.
yeah,
And then he walks out because
yeah,
you should have trusted me. So
yeah,
you help, obviously you help the NWO win. So
yeah.
it's such a cool, twist on Sting and what he was doing at that
Yeah,
point.
and to kind of give Eric Bischoff credit, because he does. I'm pretty sure he deserves it, because even the boys in the back didn't know. They didn't know. Like, I think Dallas knew because he was real good friends with Eric Bischoff, right? And Bischoff was the one who said, if this gets out, So I know, I don't know for a fact, but I'm pretty confident Eric wanted to make it so that the boys didn't know,
Yep.
nobody knew, and that's why it was so good. Because if everybody knew, right, that it was going to happen, everybody knew it wasn't really Sting, or it was a fake Sting, then you don't get that reaction. And I think genuinely some of the announcers weren't smartened up. Now, Tony, I don't know if Tony knew or not, probably, but I'm saying some of them weren't kind of smartened up in the context of that. Is it Sting? Is it not Sting? And Eric did that on purpose, because if you do that, then they really have a reaction, a visceral reaction
Yes.
to what's happening, and it makes it that much better. It was done very well. To this day, I mean, I didn't have that much of a role in it, but people say, it was like one of the best swerves and the best angles ever, to come
Yes.
out. I mean, you had Macho Man and Elizabeth. Everybody loved that. And there's lots of angles in pro wrestling, of course, through the years. But I do think it was a pretty good swerve.
Oh, it was awesome. And then if you really look at it, he turns his back on WCW, cuts that awesome promo where he has his literally back to the camera. Then he leaves, but then he comes back as the Crow Sting. He's wearing the black and the white. They tell him they want him to break on through to the other side. And then that kind of starts a little thing with him and you. Did you think that was going to be more besides him just beating you up? Did you think it was going to lead to like a more of a big one-on-one match down the
I
road?
wished it would have, but again, I don't know what they were thinking. And is there a threat to have another person playing you? I mean, uh, I don't know. I would have hoped it could have gone a little more, but I think there was a lot going on in the company about who was looking for control at the time, WCW side, the NWO side. And this was really kind of a battle, I think, as far as not so much the company, but TV ratings and the, showtime, being on the air, getting the biggest segment, being last. If you're last, you're the main event. So, do you put Sting last or do you put the NWO last? Now you're saying, who's going to go last in the show? Who's going to be the big focus of the angle, right? And you don't have enough to do everybody. You can't feature everybody. So you're going to have to pick the group, the small group, or the talent that you want to be the top, focus. So there was a little bit of a battle, I really think, an internal battle with kind of NWO or that side, and then the WCW side, kind of what they say that art imitates real life kind of a thing. It kind of happened a little bit like that. So yep. I think there was that too. And again, I wasn't in those conversations where they were booking and trying to figure out the angle, which way they wanted to go. And in a way, I'm cannon fodder. I'm expendable. I'm somebody they can use to make somebody else look good and do something. I think it was smart that they kind of kept it around a little bit, and that was smart on their part to say, hey, we can do more stuff with this. And then, going over to Japan I was just off the radar then. Like the real NWO guys, they didn't care about me. They weren't worried about, hey, what's Jeff doing? We need the NWO Sting back. Matter of fact, they had imposters of the imposter, because when I was in Japan wrestling, they had to come up with somebody else because I wasn't there. They're like, oh, he's not here. Call Farmer, he's got to do the NWO Sting. He's in Japan on tour. They're like, oh, well, we got to get somebody. So I think Chris Canyon did it one time, and some other people, they were putting other people in there.
They even had a fake Sting played by Sting, if you remember.
Yeah,
where
he took the mask off.
Him and he takes the mask off, and it's him. And oh, great.
It's good. It was fun, and it was, it could have obviously, in my opinion, there could have been a lot of ways to do that. But the whole NWO, it could have kept going too. I mean, it was so big. We had to stop it in Japan because it had already kind of stopped in the U.S. But in reality, we were still running with it months after it was kind of shut down. Like we just were still doing it. And then finally, it was like, okay, you got to cut it out. And then we did Team 2000, with Chono, and that kind of switched over. But and we were still doing basically the same stuff we were doing as NWO group. We just were now Team 2000 because we had Tenzan and Kojima, and there was all this factions of us that were against the New Japan, baby faces. So it was good. I mean, I was glad to be a part of it. You don't know at the time that you're making history, but it was, I was glad to be a part.
Now, it's funny. Shivani would be like the bogus Sting or the fake Sting. Like, he would sell it differently. Zabisco would say stink, and like they would all sell differently. But
I didn't like that when he was calling me stink. He said, "Oh, it's stink" or something like that. I'm like, "Hey, come on, take it easy, man. I got feelings too."
You're right.
But no, I'm kidding. But it was again. I don't know. Where they were. Maybe they hadn't thought, John, about what to do with the character, and they had it, and they're like, what do we do? I don't know. I don't know. I don't think it was something, again, they put a lot of thought in, like, we're really going to push this angle. I think they were happy with how it turned out. I think Eric was happy, Hogan, Nash, everybody thought it was good, but it wasn't in their, scheme.
I love it. Bogus Sting, fake Sting, imposter Sting, he would say sometimes. Like, it was only different things. Would you just say it's NWO Sting though, right? I mean, that's in essence.
In Japan, I was NWO Sting. Like that was the moniker that they put on me there, and it was and again, that's when they said, oh, it's the NWO Sting. So if you would have had Sting versus NWO Sting, it would have been huge.
Yep.
Because both could have wore the same paint and done everything, but they know Sting is this one, NWO Sting is this one. But
do you think that you look like a lot like Sting, especially at that point?
No, not really. But so in the very beginning, they did a mold of Steve's face and they did a mold of my face. And there was a guy named Andre, and he was an FX special effects guy that worked in Hollywood.
Fritas.
Yep. Yes, yeah, that's good. You know that.
Yeah.
And so they made a mold, and Andre made these prosthetics because my forehead was different than Steve's, and I had light eyes, like kind of bluish eyes, and he had dark eyes. So they put contacts in, and I never wore contacts in my life, and it was miserable because if you even get near my eye, it's closes down. It's like some Neanderthal reflex, right?
Right, right.
And so it took me an hour to put one contact in, and then it was like moving around in my eye, and I wasn't comfortable. And then I get the other one in, and actually, honestly, when I was hitting Lex in the back at the limo, there was times I couldn't even see him because the contact had moved over to the side, and the dark part was now over my vision. So it was terrible. And the prosthetics, we had to glue those on and then paint over them. And it was a big production to get painted up and all that put on. And then we realized we did it without the prosthetics once. Andre said, I don't think you need this. And I said, man, they don't know the difference. If I have this on or if I have the contacts, they can't tell. As long as the paint matches up, and I had the coat on. And so he said, yeah, let's not do it. And we didn't do it, and it worked fine. And after that, I didn't wear the prosthetics anymore. I just, I didn't wear contacts and just painted up, and that was it.
So after,
but, I mean, we were similar size, in body size, and so that part was believable, I think. But it's close enough. But
after that, do you think you had more success with Team 2000, like getting IWGP title shots, stuff like that? Do you think you had more success after that?
Yeah, because I got a lot better, right? So my wrestling skills improved tremendously working in New Japan every night like that on a regular basis, and learning the psychology and learning from some of the best in the business, right? So you cannot, go out there and not learn and pick it up, So certainly, and I think they respected me a lot in the company. At one point I was the number 3 gaijin in the country in the ratings. So they and that was pretty good. I think Stan Hansen was 1, Scott was 2, and I was 3. And Sting was 10, and Hogan was down the list too. So in the country, I was rated as the number 3 gaijin. And that meant a lot to me because I worked hard, and I think the Japanese fans respected that I worked hard. And I had a lot of matches. Hashimoto, I singles with him. I wrestled everybody over there of anything. I wrestled every single top guy in New Japan at the time, and it was earned, So I do think when I got in Team 2000, they were just like, yeah, you're part of our group. You're here. You're one of us, and that also meant a lot to me to be, they didn't go, oh, you're going to move down the card. We want you to. No, they were like, you belong here in the main event, and that meant a lot to me. And again, I feel like it was earned. But yeah, it was nice to be recognized for working that hard and to be rewarded for it.
Do you have some favorite opponents from Japan?
Well, Kojima and Tenzan, they weren't really my opponents. They were on our team, and Scott and I, we had nicknames for them. We called them the Mules because they would carry the match. Like, another part of pro wrestling that's important is that when you make a mistake, right, and you'll see this with people who aren't very good, they make a mistake and you see it and you're like, oh, he just missed that or did this or that.
Yep.
Kojima and Tenzan were so skilled that if you made a mistake, they would make it into something that didn't look like a mistake. So they would cover it up in a way that a mistake didn't happen. And you made a mistake, but they saw what was happening. And most people, when that kind of happens, you kind of get shocked and you're like, oh, mistake. And the other person goes, oh, I didn't mean it. We both messed up. They didn't even miss a beat. And the next thing you know, so you have to understand the audience doesn't really know if that was intentional or wasn't intentional, that was a slip or not a slip. I mean, some things are mistakes you can't hide. You're like, whoa, I know that was a mistake, right? But these guys were so consummate professionals in the ring and could do everything and just were like total professionals. And Scott and I would, there was times I'm on the apron watching going, oh my God, like this is incredible. And I'm up and I'm doing the job and I'm watching going, this is amazing. Like, this is amazing to be watching this happen right in front of me. I'm at the ringside, but I'm like, wow, this is special. So, yeah, there was a lot of wrestlers in New Japan, Liger, there's all those guys that were just incredible incredible talent and just were really, really good. They had been wrestling, their whole lives. Started out in amateur wrestling as kids, so there was some really good talent there. I liked wrestling, a lot of the talent that they had in New Japan. I had some really good matches with Hashimoto. Everybody said he was stiff and they didn't like working with him, but I kind of liked Hashimoto. It was, we had the similar, I was probably stiff too, at the time. So, and Fujinami is an exceptional talent. Who was the guy? I just saw something on him. Some were a little tough. Like I have to say, he was a former sumo, Yatsuda. I don't know if you remember Yatsuda, the former
Yeah.
sumo guy. Like
Yep.
he was like, he was super nice, but it's like moving around a fridge. Like you got to pick him up and try to heave him, and he's not going anywhere. And so that was not always fun. But some great matches there. Nishimura, that's who I was thinking of.
As we hit the wind down here, we head towards the finish. How close were you to ever working for the WWE or WWF? Because I know you had some dark matches for them.
I had a dark match for them. So I really thought at one point that would be an easy step for me, right? Because I'd been doing all this, and I knew the guys, like all those guys that were the bookers. I worked with them in WCW, so I knew Finley, I knew Regal, I knew Malenko, I knew Mike Rotundo, I worked with all these guys, so I knew these guys, but I didn't really know Laurinaitis at all, and I think he was the kind of booker there, and I did one kind of dark match, and then at the last second they try to swerve and say something else, and it was just it wasn't a good experience for a dark match, and it was okay. I'm sure it was fine, but just didn't get a good vibe, at that time. It wasn't like, hey, and I kind of also felt in a way, this is going to sound bad too a little, but like I'm having a dark match. I've been wrestling 10 plus years,
Right.
and with the best wrestlers in the world all over. And you're going to want me to do a dark match? Like I got to come out and so in that regard too, I felt, I don't want to say slighted, but just kind of like, we can come up with a character for me and start, we don't have to, do this, but it's fine. I didn't really follow. They didn't call me back, and I didn't call them, and it was just I didn't follow up, and they didn't follow up, and it was just kind of like one of those things that I let kind of go. And also at the time, I was thinking about, as difficult as it is to hang up the boots, I was thinking about, getting out, just because, I saw some horrific injuries in the ring. I wasn't there when this happened to Brian Johnston. I don't know if you know that story with Brian Johnston, but that I had the brain clot that went to his stem, brain stem, and was like paralyzed and had what's called locked in syndrome, and he could only blink his eyes. Thank God, he got a lot better, and there was a pathway that found a way to get the blood there around the blockage, and he regained a lot of his use of his body and his faculties and everything else. But it's scary when you see a close friend and a young guy in the prime of his life like that, 30 years old, to be sidelined so horrifically, you're just kind of like, whoa, like, I had a college degree, and I'm thinking, okay, I can do some other things. I don't have to do this. And it was dangerous. But at the other side of the coin, there was times I'm in the ring and I'm like, I can't believe they're paying me for this. I'm having so much fun. I'd do it for free. And then other times I'm like, what are you doing here? You got a degree, go, get a job. So, it's a love-hate thing at times, and any wrestler will tell you that there's times you love it and times you loathe it, or it's just difficult. You're in a hotel in a shitty place and you're like, I want to go home. So it's not for everybody, that's for sure.
Any regrets in the business, just as far as maybe not following up or maybe not doing American Gladiators? Any sort of regret in the business?
No, I wouldn't change a thing, and everybody says that, because I wouldn't have had the path I had, and I wouldn't have been where I am, and I wouldn't have, done the things I did. What wrestling did for me, especially, I was, fortunate enough to travel the world a lot. I went to a lot of countries, saw a lot of cultures, saw a lot of different people, had some amazing experiences that I would have never probably had had I not got into professional wrestling, something that takes you on that international travel and around the world and just different cities and different experiences. So it is that was a fun ride. And to be honest, the camaraderie that you have in pro wrestling and is so, I mean, I've been in sports my whole life, and you're a part of a team and a football team, and you have guys that you're close with and all that. But wrestling is another level of camaraderie, because your health and your life in a way is tied to another person like that. Like, you're putting your health in the hands of another person, and you better trust them, and you better believe in them, and you better kind of, you know, have a good feeling about this person, or you don't do it, or I mean, not always. You can't. Sometimes you got to wrestle people you don't know anything about, but it's just it's a very interesting bond, I think, that you share with other professional wrestlers that are in the business.
For
It's hard to
sure.
explain. I mean, I know military guys talk about their, they would die for their, for their comrades and their teammates and their, other fellow guys. I mean, it's not that severe in pro wrestling, of course. I'm not trying to compare it to a military, group, but it is a strong bond, that is, and it's fun to go on the road with your buddies and have fun and be traveling around, and that part is a part I miss some.
And you are trusting them in a match with your body to some extent, or to a big
Yeah,
extent.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, you have to protect yourself, and I think that's a decision you make about how you feel about somebody. Sometimes that's after a few matches, and you say, okay, I trust this guy, or I don't trust this guy. There were people in the business that were, sloppy and dangerous, and you had to be careful. And they had reputations for it, and you had to say, hey, okay, or you would just say, I don't feel safe doing something, and I mean, you don't have to do something if you don't want to, unless you're, in a situation where you do. But most of the time, I don't know anybody's going to force you to take something like, oh, you got to take this pile driver. It's, I don't know. I'm just saying, usually you can, work something out if you have some trepidation about something. But most of the guys, obviously, it's a profession, and you can't go around hurting everybody, because then you're not going to have anybody to work. Nobody's going to want to work you, and you're going to get hurt back. So you want to get hurt, hurt someone, you're going to get a receipt, and you have to be careful. There's a fine line.
Now, as far as what's coming up next, what do you got coming down the pike? Anything wrestling related coming up?
I mean, I think there's an autograph signing I have maybe in New York at the next month, something I'm doing, but not too much. I mean, here and there, if there's something, sometimes if I get called about it, and I'm not busy, I'll sometimes do stuff. But I'm retired, from wrestling, of course, but yeah, just not something. I mean, I'm very happy about my career and what I was able to accomplish in professional wrestling, and all the chances I had. But yeah, I'm just kind of in a different phase a little bit in life.
Now, are you on social media? Is there a place where everybody can find you?
No, I don't have anything to promote or anything like that. So, I would tell you, John, if I did, nothing to promote, just, trying to, do my best.
Laying low.
Yeah, laying low.
All right, awesome, Mr. Farmer. Thank you so much for all the time. The NWO, the bogus, the imposter, the fake Sting, Mr. Lightning. Thank you so much for all the time. Really appreciate it.
All right, you're welcome, John.